There are some stories that shake you to your core, stories so eerie, so chilling, that they stay with you long after you've heard them. Tonight, we dive into 3 terrifying true horror stories that will make you question your safety in the most ordinary places. These aren't just stories, they are real experiences from real people, and they might just change the way you see the world around you. Are you ready? Stay with until the end, because the last story might just make you think twice before turning off the lights tonight. If you dare to keep watching, comment "I'm brave," but if you'd rather sleep peacefully, comment "no thanks." Now, let's begin. Story 1. I've always loved the thrill of taking beautiful photos, especially in timeless places. That's what drew me to rural Maryland, a landscape of endless forests and forgotten roads. The day was long, but I was pleased with the photos I'd taken. The sun was low, casting strange shadows, and that's when I realized my mistake. I didn't know how to get back. My GPS had died hours ago, and the winding road still looked the same. Panic set in as I drove aimlessly, the trees closing in around me. As night fell quickly, I knew I needed to find shelter and regroup. That's when I saw a dilapidated house just off the road, half hidden by vines and overgrown. Desperation overcame caution. I parked and approached the house, its windows dark and lifeless. The front door gave an ominous squeak as I pushed it open, revealing a musty interior whose foul odor made me shiver. The floorboards groaned under my weight as I stepped inside, shining my flashlight around the room. It was clear that no one had lived there in years, but at least it was shelter. I found a corner in the living room to pitch my tent for the night, but as I settled in, the uncomfortable silence was broken by a faint noise. A soft, barely audible scratching came from somewhere deeper in the house. My heart pounded as I tried to convince myself that it was just an animal. I held my flashlight tightly and cautiously followed the sound, each step more hesitant than the last. The sound led me down a narrow hallway, at the end of which was a closed door. My hands shook as I reached for the doorknob, cold sweat breaking out on my skin. I slowly opened the door, revealing a small, pitch-black room. I swept the flashlight around the room, and then I saw 2 eyes reflecting the light from the far corner. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. In the corner of the room, a figure was crouching in the closet, barely visible but unmistakably human. Not moving, not making a sound, just staring at me with eyes that felt unnatural, predatory. Fear gripped me like a vice, and I stumbled back, the flashlight shaking in my hand. The figure shifted, the floor creaked beneath them, and that was enough to send me into a panic. I turned and raced down the hallway, the house seeming to close in around me. Behind me, I heard the closet door open, followed by footsteps, slow, cautious, and getting closer. I ran through the living room and out the front door, not daring to look back. My lungs burned as I ran to my car, fumbling with the keys as I tried to start the engine. Finally, the car started, and I sped down the street, the house quickly disappearing from my rearview mirror. It wasn't until I saw the lights of a nearby town that I dared to breathe again. It was then that I realized with a chill how close I had come to disaster. Whoever, or whatever, was in that house wasn't just looking for shelter. They were waiting, and I had almost walked right into their trap. I still can't forget those eyes, watching me from the darkness, or the feeling that I had just escaped something worse than being lost. Story 2. I had been out with friends, a night filled with laughter and a few drinks. When I stumbled home, the world was a pleasant blur, and all I wanted to do was collapse into bed. As I fumbled with my keys, I noticed that the house seemed eerily quiet. I assumed it was just the late hour and my own drunkenness. When I finally opened the door, I was greeted by the familiar sound of my little dog Max, his paws clicking on the hardwood floor as he ran to meet me. But something was wrong. He wasn't his usual playful self. Instead, he was growling, a low, menacing sound I'd never heard from him before. My heart began to pound harder than before, the alcohol-induced hangover starting to wear off as a wave of unease washed over me. I followed Max into the bedroom, where his growling grew louder. He was focused on something under the bed. I froze, a cold fear twisting in my stomach, as I realized that Max wasn't growling at night. I held my breath and slowly crouched down, the room spinning slightly as I looked under the bed. I froze. There in the darkness, I saw a man huddled, trying to blend into the shadows. His eyes met mine, and for a split second we were both paralyzed, staring at each other. The shock hit me like a tsunami. An instinct took over. I stumbled back, almost tripping over my own feet in my desperation to get out. The man started moving, crawling out from under the bed, and that was all I needed to see. I dashed for the door, Max barking furiously at my heels. My mind raced, a blur of panic and disbelief, as I bolted out of the house and ran to the neighbors. Knocking on the door, I could barely form the words to explain what had just happened. The neighbor quickly let me in and called the police, my heart still pounding in my chest as we waited. The minutes ticked by, each filled with the fear that the intruder might come after me. I kept replaying the moment I saw him, the terror that had gripped me as I realized someone was in my house. The police arrived and searched the house, but it was too late. The intruder was gone into the night. They found no sign of forced entry, no clue as to who he was or what he wanted. I was left with a nagging fear, knowing that someone had entered my home, lurking in the shadows. As the truth of what had happened sank in, I looked down at Max, who had finally calmed down. I realized that if it hadn't been for his growling, I might have walked straight into the room without realizing anything was wrong. The thought made me shudder. To this day, the memory of that night remains, a constant reminder of how quickly security can be breached. I owe Max more than my thanks. I owe him my life. Without him, I might not have escaped the intruder in time. Story 3. It was just a regular summer night at Camp Willowbrook. I'd been a counselor for a few years, so the routine had become second nature. Check on the campers, make sure the fire was out, and head back to my cabin to rest. But that night, as I was coming to the end of my trip, I heard a faint, gentle cry that seemed to come from the woods. At first, I thought I was imagining things. The woods were dense and filled with strange sounds, but as I listened more closely, the cry became clearer, unmistakable. It was a girl, and she sounded scared. My pulse began to pound in my ears. Campers weren't allowed to wander into the woods at night, and the thought of someone being lost out there was enough to make my stomach churn. I followed the sound through the underbrush, my flashlight casting a weak beam through the dense dark. That's when I saw her. She was standing in a small clearing, her back to me. Her long dark hair fell behind her, and she wore a white dress that looked unusually clean for someone lost in the woods. "Hey, are you okay?" I called, trying to keep my voice steady. She turned slowly, her face pale in the moonlight, her eyes wide with fear. "I'm Willa. I can't find my way back," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I froze. Willa wasn't a name I knew, and I knew every camper by heart. But there she was, alone and scared. I couldn't leave her there. "It's okay, Willa. I'll take you back to camp," I said, trying to sound comforting. She nodded and we started walking, but something was wrong. The air felt more stuffy, the woods darker than usual, as if the trees were crowding in around us. Suddenly, Willa stopped dead in her track. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling. I strained to listen, and then it was there, a sharp, cold scream echoing through the trees. My body froze and I turned, trying to locate the source of the scream, but the darkness swallowed it. "We need to keep moving?" I urged, but Willa just stared into the woods, her eyes wide with fear. Then, without warning, she dashed deeper into the woods. "Willa, wait," I called out after her. Branches whipped at my face and arms as I ran, my heart pounding in my chest. But the faster I chased her, the farther she got, until I could barely see her white dress in the dark. Then I saw it, a figure standing in the darkness just ahead. I slowed, my breath catching in my throat. As I got closer, the figure turned, revealing Willa's face, but something was wrong. Her expression was different, twisted into a cold, "Why are you following me?" she asked, her voice cold and unfamiliar. Panic rose within me. This wasn't the scared little girl I'd found in the woods. Something was terribly wrong. I took a step back, and suddenly, the ground beneath me gave way, stumbled, almost falling into a deep pit covered in leaves and branches. I staggered back, heart pounding as the truth hit me. I had been lured into a trap. Willa, or whatever she was, had led me here on purpose. I didn't wait to find out what happened next. I turned and ran until I was out of there and into the safety of the campsite. Trembling and gasping for breath, I reported the incident to the camp officials, who listened with the utmost seriousness. But when they searched the woods, they found nothing. No hole, no sign of Willa. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that something dark is waiting out there. Willa isn't just a lost girl, but something much more dangerous. And that night, I was only lucky to escape.